Hello everyone, Madden 26 just released their franchise deep dive for us all to look at and dissect, and I'm sure some of you are angry. There's really no big massive features this year, I would say, in terms of, I think, maybe things that we care about, I would say, as people who maybe, look, I actually, reading through this, if you actually go on the website, this has kind of been an issue with these deep dive trailers where I feel like they kind of like skim over some of the more important some of the more important stuff that they've added. I think there's some really good stuff in here. Actually, if you go on the website, read the Gridiron Notes. They reworked the draft prospect generators. So I think that's really good. They've assigned, new traits to new players. Every draft prospect now comes with carefully selected traits, making each one feel unique. So I think that's pretty good. I think before they always had like kind of similar traits. So I think that's pretty nice. Dedicated long snappers, gadget players, Sam and Will linebackers, rare one-of-the-kind tight ends, running backs. So I like that. I like that they've added more, rare and unique player types too. I believe they've added a bunch of those last year. Retuned retirement logic. 3 goals they wanted to focus on. They wanted to prevent star players like Derrick Henry from retiring too early. Which I believe more of that he would retire after just one season, even if they were still playing right. It doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. So I wonder how that's going to work, especially with the regression, how that's going to hit. So I think that's pretty good. The second thing that they said here, they found that retirement system put too much emphasis on a player's percentile ranking at their position rather than their actual overall rating. That led to some really good players being forced into retirement too early just because they weren't in the absolute top tier of their position. So they've adjusted that. So high-end performing veterans have a better shot at sticking around if they're still producing. I do like that. And they've also noticed a rare edge case where a very small percentage of players could slip through the cracks of their retirement logic. These players could stick around longer than intended, even if they were past typical retirement age or no longer playing at a high level. This happened because the logic allowed them to bypass the normal retirement checks based on a combination of age and percentile standing. So I believe there's a common glitch where like almost everyone's franchise would have like a guy who was like 47 years old and just not retiring. So that should be fixed. Regression logic. Player regression now follows real life aging curves more closely with decline rates based on actual NFL data by position. For example, wide receivers now stay in their prime longer than running backs, just like in real life. The timing of decline now better matches how different positions age over time in the NFL. One big change is to development trait regression. A player could drop multiple tiers in one offseason, like falling from X Factor all the way to normal bronze. That won't happen anymore. Now players can only drop 1 tier per season, making regression feel more natural and realistic. I actually like that. I would always actually turn off the development trait regression because of that. I never liked the idea of players dropping, like I said, from X Factor down to normal just in an off season, even if they were still playing well. I thought that just kind of didn't make sense. You want to do it for age-based things, or maybe they drop down from X Factor to Superstar or Superstar to Star. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. They've also removed the random element that previously influenced development trait changes. Before, some trait regression was based on a chance in order to keep the distribution balanced. Going forward, it's all about performance. A player's development trait will now be determined by how they compare statistically to others at their position. To support this new performance-based system, we've raised the standards for keeping a development trait. Players must hit higher statistical benchmarks within their position group to maintain their current tier. This rewards consistent on-field success and helps prevent traits from sticking without merit. Love hearing that. I actually think that's a really nice thing to hear. Again, if a player is playing well, he should probably keep his traits. They've also updated how ability progression buckets work, making player archetypes feel more distinct when you spend skill points. The attribute boosts now better match your chosen archetype. For example, upgrading a scrambler quarterback will boost different stats than upgrading a field general. This strengthens each archetype's unique identity, and playstyle. Together, these updates make progression and regression more realistic, more satisfying, and more directly tied to performance, just like in the real NFL. So again, another thing, I like seeing this. This really does, I think this is something this year where, yes, they have other things they worked on, and we'll talk about that later, but this really does feel like they went really under the hood this year to kind of work on a lot of things in franchise. I have just little things that I think bothered a lot of us. They aren't the big window dressing things. They aren't, compensatory picks still aren't in here. So I think that's a little disappointing, but we got some really good things this year, I think. And I think reworking progression, regression, not just for players' stats or their attributes, but also the dev traits and things like that. I think that's really big. I actually think that's going to make franchise play a lot nicer. And then also, I think one of the big ticket things that I think this is a big ticket thing, honestly, it wasn't touched on in the deep dive video, but I'm going to talk about it because to me, this is one of the most important things, and it's the game and season simulation stats. This is something that I think a lot of us have felt have needed to be reworked for many, many years and before. And they mention it in here. Franchise simulation stats and game results are too closely tied to team playbooks. That is something that they mentioned. That's something that they talked about in here. They've always focused on making the simulation stats reflect real life NFL seasons, and that includes addressing your feedback within their sim system. This year, they have reduced the overall impacts of playbooks within the sim engine, and they're confident that sim stats for Madden NFL 26 will be better than ever before. And they've said it earlier, but our team is full of longtime franchise mode fans. We do know that that is true. People have been down there to Orlando, have talked to these guys, have said this, and they understand how important it is that the engine is delivering exciting, but I think realistic results in every franchise. So again, keep sharing the feedback. I do think we are having effect, a lot of us on here who kind of talk about this stuff, do our wish list videos. A lot of the stuff that's been in here these past, I think this game cycle that I've seen from CFB 26 and Madden 26 is these are things that we've all talked about. If you've been a long time watcher of my channel, I have mentioned the sim engine for the past 3 or 4 years. I know guys like Bangle, bigger people have mentioned that. I think SoftDrink TV has mentioned that. So many people have mentioned that the sim engine, I think C4 has mentioned that. Just so many people have mentioned the sim engine needs to be reworked. It's way too based on playbooks. So this seems minor. I know there's not some one big thing in here that's probably going to get some of you really excited. But for me, hearing that they've kind of reworked this sim engine a little bit, they actually kind of talk about some of the difficulties of it. They kind of pop the hood for us a little bit here. There's a ton of factors on a per play basis. And so one of the things they did talk about here is one of the tweaks they made to the sim engine is that, hey, if Travis Kelce retires, don't expect whoever replaces him for the Kansas City Chiefs to kind of just put up Travis Kelce numbers, because in that playbook, Travis Kelce is the primary receiver a lot of the times, right? So that's not going to be something that is going to happen as often in here. They did mention that, so I think that's really cool. When they started, I guess when they also talk about here, when they started doing experiments is shifting the logic to rely more on matchups and less on playbook assignments, they would get situations that would end up being too extreme. They had an instance where Jamar Chase would end up with 250 catches and 35 touchdowns in a single season. And then they'd have another situation where a guy like Brock Bowers, who had amazing production his rookie year, in these cases, he would just end up with kind of 25 catches on the entire season. They would have cases where Joe Burrow would throw for 60 touchdowns because he would just, in the sim, he would just target Jamar Chase and T. Higgins every single play. So that's not something they wanted to have happen. So it sounds like they are going to reduce the influence of playbooks rather than just removing it. What they've kind of explained is they can't remove it because then it just kind of gets too wonky. My guess is we probably are going to see a total, eventual rewrite of the sim engine. It seems like they are aware that, okay, this thing probably needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt. But I think as of right now, they are going to reduce the influence of the playbooks rather than just removing it entirely, because they would just kind of, get just too many crazy results. And sometimes they still get occasional outliers, which we do get that sometimes in the NFL. I mean, they talk about in here, they would get a star quarterback finishing with 40 touchdowns and only 2 to 3 interceptions. Aaron Rodgers has done that like multiple times in his career, where he's thrown a bunch of touchdowns, and look, he's a guy who limits turnovers, right? Sometimes quarterback just does that, right? It tends to happen sometimes, right? If you have a quarterback that good in a good offensive system, that can happen. So I like this. I like the change right there to the sim engine. Hopefully, I can't wait to get my hands on it actually and kind of just see how it works, right? I think everyone's going to be doing that, just kind of saying, all right, how does the sim engine really work here? Is it, how powerful are the playbooks? Can we give every team the same playbook, or they put up the same stats, or do you just give everyone the same playbook and you actually just still see a wide range of stats, more kind of based on the matchups of the team in the sim, which I think is kind of what most of us actually want to see. They also made some changes to morale. They improved the morale system and how it works for certain players in our franchise. Younger players and those with lower ratings will see bigger morale boosts after breakout games. I guess this change is meant to reward under-the-radar players who get a chance to step up often because of regular starters sidelined with wear and tear. If they perform well, their morale goes up, giving them a better chance to stay hot the following week. It's designed to support long-term progression and keep players motivated even if they're on a losing team. They can still stand out even when wins aren't coming. I like that. I always felt like morale, you would kind of just get into this nosedive of morale if you didn't have a great team, where everyone would just be super negative. This also benefits players battling to hold on to a starting job. A boost in player morale could mean small ratings increase, which might give them the edge over a backup with a similar overall rating. Think about the Saints quarterback situation this year. If someone steps up and performs, they deserve a reward and will do that by raising their morale. We saw this play out during a franchise playthrough with the Steelers. Rookie Caleb Johnson started after Jalen Warren went down for 2 weeks. Johnson rushed for 130 yards and scored twice in his debut. They gave him a solid morale boost. The next week, it followed it up with 115 yards and got another bump. Thanks to that momentum, he progressed faster, and when Warren returned, Johnson kept the job, not just because of performance, because his overall rating had climbed slightly higher. So I actually like that. That's a dynamic that can happen. So they actually give us a real-world example within a franchise that they ran. So I like the sound of that. That's really cool. Just more dynamic things like that, I think kind of through gameplay is really cool. So they also revamped some of the player tag stuff. You can take a look through here. The mentor tag has new logic that only assigns to a tag to older players who have the leader personality type. I like seeing that. So again, they reworked some of the news story stuff. And to me, that's really it. The big thing, I think, if you watch the deep dive video, the gameplay I have going on the screen, as my phone goes off, the new presentation for Sunday night primetime, Monday night football, and Thursday night football, those are really cool things. I've wanted that for a couple years. The big thing was the coaching archetypes and the loadouts and play sheets. It seems like this year, the big focus was the coach experience, and probably if you were someone who does a multi-user franchise, all these little boosts and buffs. So I hope, and they do seem like pretty effective boosts and buffs, so I do hope that it does feel like you're playing a really good coach when you play the Kansas City Chiefs, right? All the boosts and buffs that Andy Reid would have should feel different than the boosts and buffs that Kyle Shanahan would have, and that should feel different from what Jim Harbaugh should have, and that should feel different from what Matt LaFleur has. It should feel different from, again, all the coaches, right? Whatever Ben Johnson's going to have. I don't know why I'm blanking on the... why am I blanking? I'm blanking on the Lions head coach. I can picture his face, but so it does sound like they've done work to make sure that, these teams really do take on the identity of Dan Campbell. That's his name. Should take on the identity of the coach. And it seems like they've really have done ways with these tiers and these abilities, and they're all different for all the different archetypes. And so, you have 4 tiers of coaching abilities and things like that. So again, making everything feel, I think, dynamic, making everything feel, I think, different from team to team, coach to coach, player to player, franchise to franchise. That kind of seemed like more of the focus this year. If you're hoping for like one big new feature, that didn't happen, right? There's no, well, actually, I disagree with that. You know what? I take that back, because you know what? I do think the halftime report and the weekly wrap-up show sounds really cool. Sounds like if you're in a multi-user franchise, your friends' highlights are going to play in that halftime report, and they're going to play in that weekly wrap-up. Your highlights, their highlights are going to play in those reports. So that's really cool, honestly. We are going to have AI CPU highlights in there. Again, they didn't really mention that in the deep dive video, but it's on the write-up. So my phone goes off again. Like, so they really need to redo these deep dive videos, I think, to really put all the details that are in here in the video, right? There's so much stuff in here. I came away with watching the video a little disappointed. Then I read the actual deep dive, and now I'm like kind of on board again. Madden 26 franchise, I think it's going to be really good, actually. I think it's going to be a lot better to play than 25, just from the gameplay standpoint, just from like the movement system from college football coming into Madden. I think was going to make this better. But I think some of the changes they made really to that sim engine are going to make things a lot better to play, and also the coach stuff that they've redone as well. So I'm going to get out of here. I've rambled on long enough, almost 20 minutes. I want to thank you for watching this video. And if watching that deep dive got you interested in maybe trying to start thinking about, hey, who am I going to take over in Madden 26? I have a video, should be right here on the screen or in the description, 6 teams I think you should run with in your Madden 26 franchise. So go click on that one. Leave a like in this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.